Still with me from Los Angeles, legal contributor Paul Henderson. And I also want to bring in our BNC team who's been covering the Derek Chauvin trial from the very beginning. BNC Chief Legal Correspondent Dr. Laura McNeal and Correspondent Dray Clark are both in Minneapolis. Thank you guys for joining me late this Friday night. To you, Dr. McNeal, what do you think this trial means for the broader issue, or not this trial, but this sentencing, for the broader issue of police accountability?
I think what it does is it sets the stage for the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to be passed. It sends a very powerful message that we need to hold police officers accountable for their wrongdoings, for their misconduct. Derek Chauvin now is the model for what to do when we see police unjustifiably kill our black men. And so I think it sent a very strong message about the need for change and, more important, an example or blueprint of what that looks like.
Dray, to you, the same question.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dr. Laura is right when she says this family is now shifting their focus from Minneapolis to Capitol Hill. George Floyd's family really wants to see members of Congress and the Senate do the right thing collectively and go ahead and pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It's all about holding police officers accountable, and hopefully police officers will now think twice before they commit acts of brutality. They'll say, wait a minute, Chauvin got 22.5 years. I don't want to go down that path, and they will think twice. But I definitely think we're going to see a momentum shift from Minneapolis to Capitol Hill to put pressure on those lawmakers in D.C. to go ahead and get that act passed.
Now, throughout the trial, the three of you were with us each night, weighing in on each key turning point in the trial, the most compelling testimony, even the shooting of Daunte Wright by another Minneapolis police officer during that trial. What are your biggest takeaways from beginning to end? Paul?
Well, my biggest takeaway is the revelation that I think we all got a master class in terms of police accountability and understanding not just what police are supposed to do, but understanding what they're not supposed to do. I'm hoping that that's information that people take back to their own communities. And while we're waiting for the George Floyd Act, that states will take independent action, and communities, local communities, will take independent actions to do things like starting civilian oversight agencies, like questioning use of force. I think all of that was evolved out of the understanding that we all got from the trial and learning about policing in ways that I'm hoping are going to move the needle and create change for communities of color specifically.
Laura, how about you? I mean, you sat down with numerous people there in the community, including the attorney, Ben Crump. So for you, your most memorable moments from beginning to end?
Yeah, so definitely my most memorable moment is going to be the testimony of Charles McMillan. That's the only individual that saw the entire interaction of George Floyd with the police officers, Derek Chauvin, from beginning to end. And seeing his emotional testimony on that witness stand really reminded me of the trauma that the members here of Minneapolis community have experienced. And another thing I think is a big takeaway for me is George Floyd humanized police brutality. We heard all the different names, the long list of names of people that have died, black people, at the hands of police officers. But seeing him for those 9 minutes and 29 seconds, literally fighting for his life, begging for the chance to breathe, humanized the movement to the point where we have allies of all colors, shapes, ethnicities that recognize systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and more important, recognize the endemic problem of police brutality. And that speaks volumes for future generations and hopeful police reform as the days move ahead.
Dray, your personal takeaways, please.
Yeah, you know, my role here, it was multiple. I was covering the trial nightly. I was spending time in the community talking to advocates and people who live there next to George Floyd Square, and then also spending time with the Floyd family. And after today, there are a couple of takeaways I have here. One, no matter what kind of demons George Floyd was wrestling with while he was living, it is clear that he was one hell of a father. He was a committed father, and listening to his daughter Gianna today talk about the time that she used to spend with her daughter, with her father, and he would, help her brush her teeth, and how that even though he's gone, He's still here in spirit. That was really remarkable. And personally, as a father of a 7-year-old daughter, and I was telling you guys during a commercial break, my son turned 14 today. It actually just reminds you of how important it is to spend time with your children. That's the first takeaway. Here's the second takeaway. It is still incredibly hard for black people to get acceptable justice in America. What happened with this case was very, very exceptional. Everything was in place. You had a white police officer who had his knee on this black man's neck for close to 10 minutes, and the bravery of a 17-year-old girl to recognize something here isn't right, and I'm going to keep this camera trained on this white man killing this black man in front of all of us here. Then you had a black police chief testify against Chauvin, and then you had a white female training officer who trained Chauvin who testified against him and said, no, we didn't teach him that. That's not what we're about here on the Minneapolis Police Department. So many exceptional things happen in this case, but the reality is black people still experience microaggressions on the streets all across America. They're still followed, they're still profiled, they're still harassed, and that's why what they're doing here on the streets in terms of advocacy is important. And I should also say what we do here on this network is important. We have to continue to do stories to highlight those injustices on black people all across this country, because unfortunately, this type of thing, maybe not in the same sort of way, but I can almost guarantee you, as sure as day follows night, we'll be having another conversation about the police doing something illegal and unbelievable against a black man or woman. And until that is corrected, we got to keep putting the pressure on and keep telling those stories so we can maybe change the system.
Paul, with the other 3 former police officers, how do you think they are feeling tonight after seeing the sentence handed down to Chauvin?
Certainly they're worried because of the verdict, but they've got to be feeling a little optimistic about how this judge ruled in terms of the time. I mean, we talked about after serving good time credit and getting out the potential of him just serving 15 years, that's got to feel like an opportunity. If I were facing that doesn't seem so bad in the big picture. Now, I think the bigger issue is what's looming in the foreground, which are the federal charges, because those federal charges come with the potential of a life sentence, and that is very different. So I would imagine that it's a mixed bag, but I would not be surprised if folks are back at the table and looking for some sort of clique to address the bigger concern, which is going to be what those federal charges are going to be. To me, all of this leaves me with, just in looking at that sentencing and today's sentencing today, the biggest question that remains on my mind is, was Derek Chauvin broken, or was the policing system broken? And if not, was the policing system doing exactly what it was designed to do in terms of perpetuating race disparities in policing? And I don't have the answer to that. And like I said earlier, this measurement of accountability still doesn't translate into a broader sense of justice. And that's what I'm looking for.
Dr. Laura and Dray, starting with you, Dr. Laura, I want to get your take on what it feels like there on the ground in Minneapolis after this sentence was handed down. Dr. Laura, any thoughts, community members that you might have spoken to about what they are feeling tonight?
Yes, so I had the opportunity to not only talk to some community members, but also several of George Floyd's family members. Specifically, I spent an hour talking with Terrence Floyd. I also talked with Philonise Floyd and some of his cousins that flew down from Houston. And they all across the board said that although they wish Derek Chauvin had gotten a longer sentence, that 40-year maximum, they were grateful that he got something because they felt that it was a step in the right direction, a step towards reform. They really iterated to me and emphasized that they don't want to see another family go through the heartache that they did. And they talk about the continuing harmful effect, the trauma they've experienced. And so the community members as well say that they're ready to move on, they're ready to heal. But I have to be honest with you, when I went to George Floyd Square prior to the sentencing yesterday, just to see what it was like now that it's opened up, I felt the same sense of harm. The community community members there told me they still feel like they're moving in the right direction, but there's a long way to go towards healing.
Dray, what about you?
Yeah, I was out here outside the Justice Center when the sentence was handed down, and the overwhelming reaction was disappointment. There were a lot of people here who believed Derek Chauvin should have received at the very least 30 years for murdering George Floyd. And essentially people said, well, it's better than nothing. It's better than nothing. It's not what we wanted. We wanted 30 or 40 years, but it's better than nothing. So in a sense, they were settling for justice, but still not 100% satisfied. They really believe that Judge Cahill could have given Derek Chauvin more years. And I think the concern is, will Derek Chauvin really do 22 and a half years in prison? That's the main question. But of course, we also have that federal indictment also pending, so he could actually end up being in prison for a very long time. We'll just have to wait and see how that pans out.
All right, veteran prosecutor and BNC legal contributor Paul Henderson, BNC chief legal correspondent Dr. Laura McNeal, and correspondent Dray Clark. Thank you guys for joining me tonight. And Dray, please wish your son a very happy birthday from all of us.
I sure will. Thank you.